The Brewers finished off their homestand by taking 2 out of 3 from the Colorado Rockies. Brandon Woodruff is coming back next weekend, or this coming weekend, I should say. Jacob Misiorowski, meanwhile, hit his first speed bump in the big leagues. All that and more coming in the next couple hours here on the Brewer Fanatic podcast. I'm Jack Stern, joined by my co-host Spencer Michaelis. And before we jump into all of it, I suppose we need to revisit the weekly question of how are our weeks going and do we have any plans for the weekend? I'll start with you.
Week's going great. I love a short week for work, so that's the main reason it's going great. But otherwise, not much going on. Honestly, I'm not, for the first time in a long time, I'm not really doing anything or going anywhere for July 4th, which is fine by me. Am I allowed to get my fireworks takes off on this podcast? Because I don't know if it'll be popular, but I'm not a fan. I am not a fan of fireworks, and it's not a pet thing or anything. I just don't understand the appeal. I don't get why people love fireworks so much. Like, I saw them once when I was a kid, and I was like, cool. I don't ever need to see those again. Like, this is not something that I need to revisit every year. I especially don't get the people who set them off throughout the month of July, and that's when I start getting actually annoyed with them. But my actual take is that I just have no reason to go watch a fireworks show. It's the same thing every single time. And I don't understand why people love it, but people do love it, and you're free to like whatever you like. But that's my take, and I wanted to get it off right away while we're talking about July 4th weekend.
I could take it or leave it. I haven't seen a fireworks show in years because, like you said, I think it's once you've seen a couple of them, you've seen them all. I don't care for the most part, though. I don't understand people who set them off way late into the month, like throughout the entire month, but for someone who gets bothered by certain things, that's I'm not especially bothered by that one. So that's all I have to say, though. Let's jump into the action, though. We'll start with this Rockies series. Brewers wrapping up their homestand against the lowly Colorado Ball Club. A couple of these games, though, probably a little bit closer than they needed to be. We'll start with game one here. Brewers 10, Rockies 6. Jose Quintana getting the ball in this one. 5 2/3 for him, 7 hits, 4 runs. I think if you just look at that portion of the box score, you might be inclined to think that this is one of his not so great starts. I would actually argue this was his best start since he's come off the IL. I think that he threw the ball better in this one than he had in any starts since he came off the injured list for the shoulder thing. Yes, it was 4 runs. Yes, it was 7 hits, but a couple of things to note here. Number one, only 2 walks compared to a lot of these starts where he was walking 3 or even 4 guys. 5 strikeouts for him. A lot of weak contact as well. He had like a 31% hard hit rate. He also probably should have gotten out of the big inning if Rhys Hoskins could catch a fairly routine return throw on a double play turn that kind of sent the inning in the wrong direction as well. Just a lot of things here that I think didn't go in his favor, which I'm not going to feel sorry for him, so to speak, for getting unlucky, because we talked plenty about how he had been pretty lucky leading into this start. So kind of a little bit of evening out. I think that he threw the ball better in this start than I think he had in quite a few of his starts where the results were much better. But this is also the nature of the game. You're going to have that regression going in that direction when he had some of that more favorable luck early on. But another thing that jumped out from this one, this was really the first outing where we saw that 4-seamer up and in to righties come back. That was a pitch that he used a lot throughout the first, or I should say the last 3 seasons leading into this year, really since he started that second act of his career in 2022. If you look at how he pitched right-handed batters, it was a very, very even distribution of almost every pitch in his arsenal, except for the slurve. He only throws that one to lefties. But sinker, 4-seamer, changeup, curveball, like about 25% for all of those pitches, especially last year. And in standard Brewers fashion, he's come over here, and then it's the game plan has seemingly been reduced to let's just throw a lot of sinkers and get guys out on sinkers. And for the most part, it's been effective for him. I think it makes some sense with the defense he's got behind him as well. But I've been kind of waiting to see this, like, go back to that high 4-seamer. Whatever the rationale was, or whoever may have been behind the decision to lean a little more heavily on that sinker, I think this is what I'd like to see him do a little more, use everything mix the pitches. This is something that had worked for him, allows him to cover both sides of the plate more. And he talked about it post game. Like if he's going up and in with those four seamers, that's going to make all of the stuff down and away a little bit more effective. For the most part, in a lot of these starts, it was just the game calling was just asking him to hit that same spot over and over and over again, that down and away, down and away, down and away, down and away to righties. This is more how I'd like to see him pitch. He's got the ability to mix it up like this, and I think it helped him in this outing too. There were a couple times, a second turn through the order, where he was getting some called strikes on like comeback two-seamers to righties, even some that got a lot of plate, and I think a lot of that was because he was showing them four-seamer inside, so then you start that two-seamer in, and then guys might take that pitch if it comes back because they're used to seeing something that was coming in on them a little bit more.
Yeah, I think what you mentioned with just the fact that it keeps hitters from being able to kind of dive out over the plate and go after everything away from him. If you're living away, yes, ideally, like if you're hitting that low and outside corner, there's not a ton of damage that's normally going to be able to be done on that pitch. But if you're just sitting there and living there, and hitters are only worried about that spot, even if they're not necessarily hitting homers, it gets to a point where they can get the barrel of the bat to it pretty consistently and start to drive line drives the other way and put balls in gaps or whatever. Like if you don't use the entire zone, it starts to become a lot easier on a hitter. We talk about that all the time. It's pretty common sense. It makes sense, but like it did feel like for a while there, they've just been trying to hammer away, down and away, everything out there. And at one point, hitters are going to adjust to that and they're going to get comfortable and they're going to be able to do something with it. So I think the other part of it is he's also always been very comfortable throwing this up and in four seam. Like this is a pitch he commands well. It's a pitch that he can, one, probably get a little swing and miss on when guys are starting to dive out over the plate, or, you know, it just kind of can beat guys once in a while. And if not, even if it doesn't beat him quite enough to get a swing and a miss, that's where you can start getting jam shots and stuff like that to happen because guys are not able to, if they are sitting out over the plate, you can get in on them on the hands. And then if they start adjusting to that, you can go back to moving away and you just play the game. That's what pitching is really. You just play the game with the hitter and make the adjustment as they make the adjustment, or ideally at the same time if you're able to get in their head enough. But it was nice to see this. I do think this is going to be a way for him to get better results in terms of, or more believable results, I guess, even because like we've said, he's kind of had pretty good results outside of a couple starts off of the IL. But I think there's a more sustainable way to do this. And I also note in this start particular, he was probably out there longer than you normally would have Quintana out there. And that I believe led to at least one of the earned runs, if not two. But at the same time, that's not a bad coaching decision. I think it was worth it to try and do it. The Brewers had a nice lead. The bullpen can always use a little extra rest. So I had no problem with him staying out there, but I think he was at the end of his rope a little bit when he gave up a couple of the runs as well. So that might have contributed to the line not looking as good as maybe the way he actually pitched.
On the offensive side, Jackson Chourio driving in 4 of those 10 runs, including a 3-run homer that was part of a 6-run fourth inning for the Brewers. And then, like we had mentioned, the Rockies pulling it a little bit closer once we started getting into those late innings, and then Christian Yelich delivering a couple insurance runs in the 8th inning with a 2-run RBI double. Game 2, the Brewers winning in pretty authoritative fashion in this one, 5-0. Quinn Priester was the story of this one. 11 strikeouts for him in 7 innings, and the craziest part for me was that he did it on 95 pitches. To strike out 11 guys in 7 innings and throw under 100 pitches is pretty impressive. Now, the one pretty important caveat to include here is that this is a Rockies team that statistically is the worst team in baseball at making contact and putting the ball in place. So I think it's one of those games where you can say Priester threw the ball very well, but he also had the benefit of facing a pretty bad offense. There were a couple pitches where he would throw a breaking pitch that got a lot of the plate and guys would still whiff on it. And those, for as many quality pitches as he threw in this one, I'm sure that just from a process standpoint, you would still say, yeah, I'm not trying to throw a slider that catches a lot of plate like that, and I'm not expecting to get a swing and miss there. But really just continuing the theme from a lot of these last few starts of using the rest of these pitches more of the cutter, more the curveball is really what we saw more of in this one,
Mm-hmm.
especially. I think he's starting to find like that high cutter curveball tunnel that he can use a lot more to lefties. And that's something that if he can get that down, it's going to even out the platoon split that comes with being more of a sinker slider guy. I remember when I did that story on him uh, about a month ago or whenever it was, and I talked to Chris Hook. One of the things that he did mention was, yes, we're sinker slider for now because we've identified those are the best pitches and we can just let those eat right now. But he did say long term, we still want to reintroduce a lot of these other pitches back into the mix. And he did say once we can start getting the feel for those, I think there's going to be more swing and miss in there. And sure enough, throwing more pitches, even against this bad of a lineup, still 11 strikeouts, getting more of the swing and miss, especially on those breaking pitches. He had like a 70% whiff rate on his breaking pitches in this start. So it seems like we're starting to see a little bit more of what things can look like when Quinn Priester is able to use his entire arsenal. And again, got to pump the brakes a little bit just knowing who he was facing. I don't think he's going to go and strike out a ton of guys moving forward, as many as he did, at least not as many as he did in this game. But never a bad thing to see that it seems like he's starting to move on to that next step for his development. And quite honestly, that I wasn't really expecting that step to come quite this season yet, because some of the stuff they were working on with some of these other pitches, the sense that I got was that it was going to be a little bit more of a long-term thing before that started coming together. But it seems like they're pretty happy right now just with like how he's been able to use the cutter in some of these outings, and then getting to use that curveball off of that, making a difference for him in this one.
Yeah, this is obviously, like you said a number of times, this is a very bad Rockies offense and a team that isn't just a bad offense in general, but also one that swings and misses a lot. That said, I think it was a couple episodes ago. Either way, we've been asked about him a lot. Obviously, I had pretty strong opinions on the trade. I kind of comped him to Adrian Hauser, and at the time, I even said I was like, but I thought Hauser had maybe even more potential that he maybe never unlocked with the Brewers, but it always seemed like there was more there for him, and I didn't know if Priester had that. I think now I absolutely believe he has that in him at the very least. Somebody who there's more there than I thought there was at the time of the trade. I don't want to again jump the gun on this because this is a bad offense. There's a lot of reasons to have, kind of pull back the reins on this, but you can see it. I mean, he's very comfortable. I think there's just a good fit here, which is why the Brewers liked him a lot, I'm sure, is they thought that with the team that they have and with the way they teach pitching and with the way they do things, they thought it could be a really good fit. And I mean, to this point, it's pretty hard to argue with those thoughts and with the results that we've seen so far. And I do think he's already made bigger strides than I would have expected him to. And even just like beyond the Rockies part of the equation here, we talked about at the time of the trade that he's had trouble making the curveball a viable pitch because he didn't have a pitch that it blended with or that it could really tunnel with at all. And so it was just an easy take for teams. He was throwing it to righties and lefties in this game. He was getting some whiffs against righties. I mean, again, Rockies, everything else, but I do think that cutter, and this was the part of the equation, Jack, that you had much more hope for than I did at the time. I didn't see it with the cutter. And I still don't think it's like a great pitch right now, but I think he's commanding it pretty well. And he's just using it really well to set up these other pitches. And that's enough for the moment. And if he can continue to develop it, then I think there's even more here for him. So I'm not sure I'd still be in line with what I think the Brewers think is his ceiling, but I would probably say that my view of his ceiling has gone up a decent amount since the trade happened. And that's important. I think he could be a middle of the rotation guy if things click correctly for him. And I did not see that coming into the right after the acquisition. So if he reaches that, then it's very, very hard to argue with what they gave up in that deal. There's really no argument at all.
Joey Ortiz staying hot with another homer in this one. That would continue in New York as well, which we'll get to in a couple of minutes. But 5-0 Brewers in Game 2 of this Rockies series. Game 3, Colorado would salvage the series with a 4-3 victory in 11 innings. A couple of missed opportunities here is kind of the theme for Milwaukee in this one. Sal Frelick and Christian Yelich both homered to give the Brewers a 2-0 lead in this one, which they would take into the ninth as a 2-1 lead, till Trevor McGill allowed a game-tying home run to who else but Orlando Arcia. That kicked off a couple of extra innings, Brewers blowing opportunities in the bottom of the ninth and in the bottom of the 10th to put this one away. Instead, the game would remain tied, and then they would ultimately fall in 11 innings. So in the ninth, they had first and second, one out, couldn't make anything happen. And then in the 10th, they had first and second with nobody out and couldn't make anything happen. So a couple of missed opportunities there for Milwaukee, preventing them from a sweep over the Rockies. Brewers then going to New York to meet the Mets for the first time this year, the first time since that wild card series several months ago in which New York swiftly eliminated the Brewers, including with that seesaw Game 3 of that series. We have the first two games for you here, which were played as a doubleheader on Wednesday because Tuesday was rained out. We're recording this on Thursday afternoon. Brewers will take on the Mets for Game 3 later tonight, so we won't have those results for you yet. But Game 1, Brewers defeating the Mets 7-2 in this one. Freddie Peralta going 6 innings, allowing just the 2 runs, only 2 hits for him, 6 Ks to 1 walk. Pretty solid outing for him to set the tone to start this series. Meanwhile, on the offensive side, Sal Frelick got it started with a home run to lead off the game. That would be his 6th of the season. Joey Ortiz, then, like we mentioned, staying hot. So he came up in his prior at-bat to this at-bat with the bases loaded and swung at a first pitch sinker and bounced into a double play. Pat Murphy saying post-game that would have been a double tase offense. Pat Murphy likes to joke about tasing his players. Joey Ortiz, however, getting a shot at redemption in his next at-bat, once again coming up with the bases loaded. Got ahead in the count 3-0, took a strike, and then a 3-1 hanging breaking pitch. Had the green light on that one, and he was able to drive it to left for a grand slam. Isaac Collins adding a solo home run as well. He went 4 for 4 in this game. He now has a 127 WRC plus. So that brings us to our first question of the week. Henry asked us, Isaac Collins, all-star?
No, but it's absolutely insane. Like, if you stack up his numbers, it's not that far off if he had more plate appearances. Like, he's played a lot, obviously, for the last couple of months, but that first month, not so much, and he's not quite qualified. I haven't compared exactly with like the expected all-stars in the outfield for the NL, but like, it's not a great crop of players, and he would have a case if he had done this for the entire season, I think. Not as like a surefire starter or anything along those lines, but he would have a case, which is absolutely insane. I mean, a 127 WRC plus, he's been tremendous on defense. It's the coolest story to come out of the Brewers this year, I think, just in terms of like expectations. Nobody had expectations like this for him, and he's doing it in a way that not sustainable, but also still like there's a lot of good to his process. There's a lot of things that he does well at the plate, and the defense, I think, is sustainable because he gets such good jumps. I mean, he's just been an awesome player for the Brewers, and I'm not sure the Brewers would have made the run they've made to give themselves a chance the rest of the year if Isaac Collins is not doing what he's doing for them regularly in the lineup. So it's been a really nice boost for the team. And no, not an all-star, but kind of insane that it's not like the craziest question in the world to ask that. He won't be, but it's just cool that it's even somewhat conceivable, I guess.
Isaac Collins, among all primary left fielders, so no, plate appearance qualification, he's third in FWAR at 1.8.
Yeah.
So a couple of guys that he's ahead of. He's ahead of Brandon Nimmo of the Mets. He's ahead of Ian Happ of the Cubs. Like, a couple of names on here who you would maybe not expect to be seeing him either above or in the company of. Obviously, he's not going to be an all-star. I don't think that, you look at like the plate appearances and all this stuff. And unfortunately, the lack of name recognition as well,
Yeah.
that makes a pretty big difference, especially when you're not only when you're talking about the starters, but also the guys who get picked to be reserves as well. Like there's got to be just awareness of these guys for them to get selected, even to be on the bench. But certainly can't say enough about what he's been able to provide to the Brewers this year. I was talking to someone a few days ago, and they asked me a question along the lines of like, where do these guys just keep coming from? They say it just seems like every year there's this random guy who I've never heard about, and all of a sudden, even if it's just for a little stretch of the season, he's one of the Brewers' better players. And I think this speaks to just how many guys the Brewers pile up in the upper minors who just have floors as like okay big leaguers, like not even starting caliber, but like okay bench guys at the very least. So Isaac Collins fits that mold. I think that even like Andrew Monasterio a couple of years could have fit that mold, and he was someone who produced for a little bit a couple of years ago as well. So you have these guys, and then if one of them gets hot for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, that's what Collins is doing right now. Monasterio did it a couple of years ago before he came back down to earth, but I think we've talked about him plenty. Like you can still look at the plate discipline, the ability to bounce around between multiple spots. Like maybe not someone who you'd prefer to be giving at bats to, but still you can get away with him as a decent bench guy. Like just these kinds of profiles, the Brewers really load up on them. And it's not to say all of them work, but they load up on these guys. You roster the right one. And then if he has a few good weeks, all of a sudden you're looking at a situation kind of like what you're seeing here. And I would imagine Collins is still going to come back down to earth. In fact, I wouldn't be stunned if there was like a major cold streak coming to the point where we wake up in a few weeks and all of a sudden he's a tick below average again as a hitter, which is fine. He's doing what the Brewers have asked him to do and then some. And even if there is some regression coming, still someone who's a pretty quality bench piece for them. Game 2, the Mets bouncing back to beat the Brewers 7-3, nearly flipping the score essentially in Game 2 of the doubleheader. The theme in this one was Jacob Misiorowski had his first rough start in the big leagues, and I was a little surprised it took until start number 4, but it did happen against this Mets team. 3 2/3 for him, 5 hits, 5 earned runs, 3 walks, 2 Ks, a couple of homers. The 2 homers both coming in a rough inning for him, which is really where all the damage came. A lot of 2-out walks. Mets then getting to some pitches. There was a slider that got probably a little bit too much of the plate. And then the pitch that Frankie Lindor hit out, though, was actually a pretty well-executed fastball, and that's just a good hitter getting on top of that pitch. So I don't think you can really read too much into that one. But really just 2 things from this one that stood out to me. This was the first start where I think we started to see the snowball effect a little bit, where had made a couple rough pitches, wasn't in the strike zone, and then instead of locking it right back in, it kind of kept unraveling a little bit from there. Multiple 2-out walks in a row, then making some pitches that caught a little more plate, but also the velocity going down too in that inning as well. You've mentioned it before, like you expect that the cruising speed is probably going to go down from where it's been, but to see even more like 95s and 96s with the fastball in this start, particularly in that rough inning. This is the one where it was like, okay, you could kind of see things were maybe getting to him just a little bit, which I don't think is the worst thing in the world. Just from a development standpoint, I'd prefer that he gets punched in the mouth a little bit sooner as opposed to having, 8 starts in a row where he's amazing and carving guys up. And then he gets dealt, kind of a tougher outing like this. I think this is a good experience to have.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And it's funny when you look at that whole inning, if he could have just gloved that comebacker to him, the one hopper that went past him, like that inning doesn't happen. Like he would have been facing the top of the order. His stuff was not where it had been. His command was not where it had been. But I bet the line would have ended up looking fine if he would have gloved that ball. So that's, again, one of those things in baseball where it's like, yeah, one of those tiny little things that if you make that play, you could have looked fine, even though he was not pitching very well yesterday. A lot of arm side misses, which is how it's been for Miz in his career. Vinny Rotino was talking about it on the broadcast, and he was absolutely right. Like, he's kind of a miss high and outside to right or to lefties. So miss high and arm side, or yank it down and towards the feet of a lefty. So that's what we saw yesterday. Like, he was missing. He was starting to show some emotion on calls that were absolutely correct from the umpire on some pitches that were definitely out of the zone, and he thought were in the zone. And just, I think it unraveled on him a little bit. And like you said, I think you have to have that happen. You have to have moments where you kind of learn how to, okay, next time this happens, I got to be able to fight through this. I got to be able to figure out a way to not let that happen, or not let this kind of snowball on me. He mentioned after the game that he had been getting on the side of the ball a little bit more that inning, and I'm sure that was playing into the reason that Lindor was able to kind of turn around a fastball. I didn't look at the exact shape of that fastball, but if he was getting on the side of it, it wouldn't have had as much carry, which is what his fastball does when it's at the top of the zone. It'll get by people because of that carry. So it's just one of those things. I'm with you where I think it's better to happen now than later. And now we just have to see how he responds. And I don't have much concern with how he's going to respond. But it's going to happen again at some point. This is just going to be the case with a young pitcher. And I'm not going to use the Burns example because that's the easy one from 2019. And we all saw how that one happened in that season. But even when you look back at Woodruff, that's my favorite one to look back on, because he always, his first year or two starting, there was always one inning that he would just kind of let get out of control on him. And he looked great until that point, or he looked like he was getting through the game great and figuring out a way. But when he'd all of a sudden get into some trouble, he would let it snowball on him. And the moment he stopped doing that is when he became the Brandon Woodruff that we saw until he got hurt. And I think that's the lesson that Miz is going to have to learn at times. I'm sure this is actually how it went in the minors too. He wasn't really give up one in the first, give up one in the second, two in the third type of guy. Like, he had a bad inning and it would kind of snowball on him. So if he has bad games, this is kind of how I would expect it to look. But I do think this is something he's going to learn from. And eventually it's the thing that will take him to that next level as a starter when he gets there. But there are going to be bumps in the road, and there's going to be more, like I said.
The final note too the only thing I really have to add to that is I don't think he's ever going to be a guy who is running into a whole lot of trouble because he's getting hit a ton.
Mm-mm.
I honestly think that as much as he got hit, I think like this start is about as much as you're going to see him get hit in the vast majority of his outings. But I think when guys do hit him based on the velocity, based on the arsenal, the pitch shapes, all this stuff, like, he is going to be a guy who, when guys hit him, it's going to be the long ball.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, I'm not surprised that it was the 2 home runs on top of the walks that did him in. I think really that's going to be the combination. If he doesn't have a good start, it's going to be because the walks got away from him and then somebody put a big swing on the ball. And I think that's where a lot of it is going to come from. So if I had to guess, like, I would not be surprised if we see like 5 more starts that look very, very similar to this one the rest of the year. And then outside of those remaining 5, then the rest of those starts are all pretty good.
Yeah.
If I had to take a guess, I think that's kind of the
that's
shape
reasonable.
I think that's the shape I could see his season taking. On the offensive side, quickly to note for the Brewers, not a lot of offense in this one, but Christian Yelich and Jackson Chourio hit back-to-back homers. Spencer, the final note you put on here for this game is Aaron Ashby throwing 1/3 of an inning. Had to get some bullpen usage talk in here. So, in a game, the Brewers actually, I guess there's 2 things from the doubleheader. First, you had Nick Mears pitching with a 4-run lead, and I believe it was the 7th inning in Game 1 when you had an entirely fresh bullpen that included Aaron Ashby, DL Hall, Easton McGee, and then, as we would find out, Craig Yoho coming up for Game 2 as well. I don't think it's like far from the worst thing that we've seen happen on the bullpen side under the Pat Murphy regime. But still, like, those are the little outings of, does he really need to pitch right now? And those add up over the course of a season if you keep doing it. But then game 3, in a game that the Brewers were trailing by multiple runs the entire time, pretty much, Aaron Ashby recording 1 out in this game, and then Jared Koenig, the leverage lefty, pitching to 3 batters. So you had when the Brewers were still trailing. So you were down by multiple runs the entire time, and your leverage lefty pitched more than your long relief lefty. Now, I wouldn't be shocked if part of the issue here was that Aaron Ashby got hot in game 1 and didn't pitch. So if that's, you have to factor that in as well. If he got hot 4 hours earlier and then had to sit back down when he got up for game 2, maybe he legitimately couldn't give you length at that point, which again, like, you got to think ahead a little bit. If you're going to get a length guy hot, I mean, it's got to be a situation where you're going to use him. And that obviously didn't happen in game 1 here, or in game 1, and then it bled over into game 2. You did have DL Hall ate up some innings in game 1, though. He went 2 innings. Easton McGee did pitch in this game as well. But just a couple of these little things, again, that I don't like to keep picking at them, but I think we both still see them as an issue. So in the interest of consistency, when they pop up, we're going to point them out.
Yeah, and the main thing, like you talked about with Ashby, he did get hot in game 1. To revisit that point from you, I think that's something that just almost has to be a non-negotiable. If a long relief pitcher gets hot, they should go in the game, and they should pitch, and they should give you multiple innings, assuming they're doing well enough to have them stay in the game. It happened in the Rocky series at least once too. In fact, I think it was the extra innings game. Did Ashby finish that game? I'm trying to remember who pitched the last, or no, he was warming up again.
Ashby was warmed up and didn't pitch on 3 separate occasions in that game. Grant Anderson finished it.
Yes, that is right. So yeah, and that was one where I think the first time he got up was when Quintana was. Am I thinking of the wrong game now?
This would have been, this was the extra.
No, yeah. So yes. This was the first time he got up was like in the 6th inning. Then he got up again, I believe, in the 9th when McGill gave up the game-tying homer, because I think they were going to have McGill come out of the game and put Ashby in at that point if they took the lead. And then he got up again in extras and did not get used. And I just, again, if he's your long relief guy, I don't understand. It's fine if you want to use him in more leverage spots, I guess. I have no problem with that. I think he has the stuff to do it. But you've clearly made it known that Koenig's your guy for that, and you've gone to him in those spots pretty much every time. It's just hard. It's hard for me to understand why Ashby's getting hot like multiple times. Every time he's going in, it feels like he rarely gets up and just pitches. And he's obviously held up fine so far through it, but for a guy who's coming off a major shoulder injury last year, and a guy who was a starter for most of his amateur and professional career until August of last year, those are not things that he's even comfortable with to the extent that other like longtime relievers are. So it's weird to me. I can't imagine it's good for Ashby. And it does, I think, put you in a potential situation like last night where I would be willing to bet that was the case, why he only ended up pitching a third of an inning, because I can't really come up with a better reason why he would have only been out there for a third. So like Jack said, this isn't a matter of like trying to rip on it every time, but I just think if we don't point it out, then we're not staying consistent. And at the same time, like, these things add up over time. They aren't just like, oh, it happened, now the new week resets everything. That's not how it works. If over time, all of these things just start to add up, and getting hot over time is similar to getting used in games. So if you just keep getting hot, and then you also get used in a game after your third time getting up, like, it just, I know the trainers and everybody else, they obviously have an idea of what's going on. The Brewers track these things. They're counting pitches in the bullpen. So I'm not saying like they're completely oblivious to this, but I just wonder, like, this does not seem normal to me. So it's just something that I struggle to understand, and I cannot imagine that it's a good thing for the relief pitchers to have this type of thing happen as often as it does.
Yeah, this is the other side of the bullpen usage that we haven't really talked about. We've talked about maybe guys pitching in situations where, like, just the distribution of innings there is going to come back to bite you because it's not sustainable. Like, you're not using guys who can eat more innings when you could be using them. Instead, you're using guys who need more rest, like, and overworking them that way. But the other side of this is, and this is the one that's a little even harder to pinpoint a little bit. But I recently tried to lock in on it a little more, especially on this last homestand. So it has seemed like for a lot of the year, on top of the actual in-game usage, there's just a lot of action all the time in that Brewers bullpen. So on this last homestand, just out of curiosity, I started marking down every time the Brewers got a reliever up and moving and throwing, and then every time the opposing team got a reliever up and moving and throwing, and then did that guy come in? Basically, did that guy sit back down before he eventually came into the game, or didn't come in at all? So, like, if you had a guy who was getting up during an inning, the existing reliever finished the inning, but that guy stayed up because he was getting the next inning, that doesn't count. That's still pretty straightforward and pretty standard. But like situations like for Ashby, where he's standing up, he's throwing, he's getting ready, and then he has to sit back down and either doesn't pitch or he gets back up again later in the game. So I counted this throughout the last homestand, and opposing teams in that 6-game homestand, there were 4 instances in which those teams got a reliever up and moving and throwing and getting ready, and then he sat back down. Didn't pitch in that situation, sat back down. The Brewers during this 6-game homestand did that 18 times. So 18 times in a 6-game homestand where somebody got up, started moving, started throwing, and then had to sit back down because he wasn't actually called on in that situation or in the following inning or whatever. Now, I don't know that number has a ton of weight without context, and it's only one homestand. But this does get the gears turning in my head. Like I want to keep watching for this, because do the Brewers actually under Pat Murphy get guys hot and not use them more than a lot of other teams? That's what I'm curious to know. And then off of that point, I'm curious, okay, well, how are they handling this? Like you said, that yes, they track the pitches thrown in the bullpen, they track all this stuff. I'm sure they're not flying blind. But it is interesting to me. I'm curious if there's another layer to this now of not only how guys are being used in games, but how guys are actually getting ready in the bullpen too, and if that can have some kind of carryover. And you can talk to relievers, and the exact answer will differ for everybody, but a lot of them will tell you, like I've heard from some guys, a day in which you get ready in the bullpen but don't pitch, you get hot but don't pitch, it's about 50, 60% of the workload of an actual in-game day, is kind of how a lot of guys see it, just based on what you're doing physically and what that does to your body. Most guys are not throwing full intensity until they actually get onto the mound and get their 8 warm-up pitches, so that helps. But just another layer to this too. I'm not going to go a whole lot deeper, just because this is only one homestand where I've actually started writing this stuff down. But I think it's another thing to watch now as well. So we'll see where that goes. But as I mentioned before, Game 3 going to be going on tonight, so we won't have anything for you when you're listening to this on Friday morning or over the weekend. With that, we can move on to a couple of transactions. The first one to note, technically not a transaction yet, but it's a transaction that will be coming. Brandon Woodruff is finally a probable starter for the Milwaukee Brewers for the first time since September of 2023. Ironically enough, he's going to start at the same stadium where he made his last big league regular season start. He's going to start against the Miami Marlins on Sunday. Made that last rehab appearance. Everything not only went well from a health perspective, but the velocity was right back where we wanted to see it. Spencer, we've talked about this almost every single week on the show since he had that setback. We both said like it could be a blessing in disguise to actually get the stuff where it needs to be, because it wasn't when he was nearing those first couple returns. Woodruff himself went on to say it was a blessing in disguise because he could clean some things up. And then he went back and pitched for Nashville in Jacksonville, sitting not only 92 on, I believe it was the sinker that sat 92, but the four-seamer sat 93 and touching 95 again, like all this stuff. The results weren't great, but I don't care about results in a rehab start just because you're not pitching those guys the way you would in a big league start.
Yeah.
The velocity was good. The pitches are doing what they're supposed to, and he's healthy and he's stretched out. Those are the only things that matter. And again, like we've talked about this plenty, if the stuff is at where it was in that last rehab start and he can execute that decently well, he's a 6-pitch guy now because he's got those new pitches he's added. Again, it's not going to be close to where it was before, but he's got the mix right now of somebody who can be like a back end guy and either pitch to like somewhere in, maybe I would say at this point, like that 3.9 to 4.10 ERA range, 4.20 ERA range, like something in that neighborhood, like ballpark of league average, I think is something that he can do right now. And obviously that's probably not the end goal for him, but in terms of what he can accomplish this season as part of a comeback, I think that would be pretty impressive.
Yeah. Going back to what we talked about way at the beginning, way in the offseason, I mean, that's still basically where we've always thought it could be if the stuff got to the point that it's at right now. And like you said, this is all I was looking at in the AAA, in the StatCast data and everything. Like all I wanted to see was the stuff where it had been at the beginning of his rehab assignment, and it was. And like you said, maybe even like a slight tick higher on the velo, the average velo, and he did it over 80 pitches. Like you said, results weren't good. I mean, to me, a major league rehab start is very much like a spring training start. When I look at it, it does not matter to me. Results, not only are they, like you said, Jack, not going after hitters in a way where it's like, okay, we're specifically going to try and get you out here. It's more about working on certain things that you're working on in a game setting, but also just even pitch mix stuff sometimes is a little more like canned. Like we want to get this many pitches in of this type of pitch, and we want to do things like there's so many things that are happening in a rehab start that are way beyond the results that he is generating in that game. So it looked good. The stuff looked good. He came out of it feeling like he's in a good place. Honestly, the fact that they were kind of longer innings and the results weren't great and the stuff was still staying up over the course of longer innings, like the 80 pitches, he didn't even, I don't think he got through 4 innings to get there. And honestly, that's not the worst thing. That's a little bit of a test in its own right. Like, can he have a longer inning and continue to go? And does the stuff stick where it's supposed to be over the course of a long inning? And all of that held true. So it's very cool to see him listed on the probables, something we've talked about, like you said, pretty much every week this entire season. And it's as close to official that he'll be making his return as it can possibly be on this Thursday. So I'm looking forward to it just to see Woodruff on the mound again. And we'll see where the results end up falling. But I agree with you. I think we're looking at a guy who, at least in terms of like the caliber of what he does on the mound, should fall in like that upper 3s, low 4s type of range. I think he's capable of doing that. And then you never know. I mean, he could have a 3.5 ERA because every hard hit ball finds a glove over the last 3 months of the season. Like, it's going to be a small enough sample where you could have a worse ERA than what you deserve or a better ERA than what you deserve, even more easily than you can over the course of a whole season, which it still can happen. But I think what I'm expecting in terms of his ability is someone who, if everything is going exactly as you'd expect, yeah, he can be a back end guy who's sitting in that high 3s, low 4s type of ERA. And I'm just excited to watch him do that. So it'll be really cool to see him on the mound. And like you said, in Miami again, where he made his last start, which I always forget was like a good start. There were no signs that anything was wrong with him in that start, really. And then he obviously,
the velocity was down quite a bit in that start.
Oh, well, I looked at the box score. I actually didn't watch that start. That's why I don't remember. But he had a good final line in that game, didn't he?
He did, yeah. He
Okay,
pitched well, but it was like that
sure.
I
So
think
there
his
was
velo
something.
slipped. He was, like, down to 93 for a good chunk of that start.
Okay,
Like, the
so
velo slipped pretty significantly.
there was something there. Okay, either way, he got the results, and I guess maybe that's also a sign of what he can do when the velo is down. So, yeah, I'm just looking forward to it. I'm just a huge Brandon Woodruff fan and very excited to see him back on the mound.
The other headline on the transaction front took place going into that Mets series. Anthony Seigler is in the big leagues. I know Spencer's happy about that. I'm excited to see him too because I think that he's a nice little player. Not anything amazing, but if you had to ask me who I like more as a baseball player, Seigler or Durbin, I would say Anthony Seigler, even for as well as Durbin has played over the last several weeks. So he was added to the 40-man roster. Daz Cameron was DFA'd. Couple more moves. Rob Zastryzny to the injured list with a stress reaction in his ribs. And then Easton McGee recalled to pitch out of the pen. We mentioned that he threw an inning in game 2 of that doubleheader. Before we break down Anthony Seigler, or before I ask you to break down Anthony Seigler, just to jog some folks' memory, H.C. Purdy asked, who has better hair, Jack or Anthony Seigler? I'll go first as part of this question. Generally speaking, it's the professional athlete because they have way nicer products and way nicer hair care routines than I do.
Yeah, I mean that's completely fair. I would give it to Seigler, but the fact that it's a conversation, I mean, you should be proud of that, Jack. We're having a hair conversation back-to-back weeks, but Seigler does have, I mean, it's nice hair. It looks real nice on a baseball field, and that was kind of my point last week. Was that's why you always look like a baseball player because that type of hair just fits on a baseball field. And no, he looks. It's a nice head of hair, and I think we even got a reply from somebody who very clearly said it's not close at Seigler. I'm not going that far. I think it's reasonably close, but you are right. He's got way more resources at his disposal to make this a little bit of an unfair game.
Now that we have the hair game discussion taken care of, do you want to just quickly recap what you've seen from him over the last several weeks? I believe you said that he made a change. He's not switch hitting anymore. He's only a lefty.
Yeah, he actually reverted and did some switch hitting again the last week. He's been going back and forth against lefties. I don't know if it's like a certain type of pitcher, maybe like certain pitches that he throws and he feels more comfortable batting lefty against them, but he's been a switch hitter his whole career and he's had very, very big splits his entire time in pro ball. He's always hit righties much better. Not great early in his career. Now, the last 2 years, he's been quite good against righties, and especially this year, it was an OPS over 900. But the one against lefties was about 500 points lower. So it's just never been something that he's been great at in pro ball. And for a week stretch, he was taking at bats lefty against them, and he even had 2 hits, which may have almost matched his entire total for the season righty. And big hits even against one of them. One of them was a go-ahead hit in the 8th inning. Like he looked pretty comfortable in the at-bat. So I figured, okay, he's probably going to stick with this. Then the next time I saw him take an at-bat against the lefty, he was hitting righty. So I'm not sure exactly what the logic is behind it. I haven't heard anybody talk about it or ask him yet. And we haven't had an opportunity to see what he's going to do if he comes up in that spot in the big leagues. But I do wonder if batting lefty might be the way to go for him, just given how poorly it has gone from the right side. Either way, the main thing here is that in the strong side platoon against righty pitchers, he has been very, very good from the left side. The raw power here, it's not that much different than like a guy like Durbin or Frelick or guys like that. But in terms of his launch angles, Seigler had a 99th percentile launch angle sweet spot in AAA this year, meaning he hit the ball at ideal launch angles, and he did it in like hard too. So he hit the ball on average actually in like the 90th percentile for average exit velocity, while his max exit velo and his 90th percentile were in around the 10 to 15th percentile. I've rarely seen that. I don't think there are too many hitters who fall into that category, but it shows how often he's able to maximize what he can do with the bat. And he's doing that while running a low whiff rate, low strikeout rate, high walk rate. He doesn't chase much. And at the same time, he swings a decent amount when it's in the zone. So he's not just being overly passive and not swinging hardly at all. He's actually just making very solid swing decisions in terms of in zone swings in AAA. I really like his swing on top of that. Like, I think it's just a clean swing with a lot of room in the zone. Like, there's a lot of time the barrel spends in the zone, which makes sense for why he's able to hit the ball hard on average and also at decent launch angles so consistently. And then the other part of it is he stole 20 bases. He's a very good athlete. I don't think he's going to be a huge stolen base guy in the big leagues. I don't think he's quite that level of speed, but I think he's a guy who can swipe bases and probably at like a higher level than someone like Collins does even. And then on defense, he can legitimately handle himself behind the plate as a catcher. He played a lot of second base early in the season, and then we saw in his debut, his 2 games in the doubleheader, he played both games at third, which is a newer position for him. I wouldn't say he's a lockdown defender at third base right now, which is to be expected for such a new position, but he took to it pretty well, and I think he looks pretty comfortable over there. He has the arm for it as somebody who can catch and has a pretty decent arm as a catcher. He just does a lot of things, and I think one thing I'll be watching is with the catcher versatility that he brings, does that make them more comfortable? One, maybe having Contreras DH a little bit more often, and maybe against a lefty starter, you get Haas behind the plate and Contreras DHs. Or in certain scenarios, do you feel more comfortable pinch hitting a guy like Haas against a lefty and then having the ability to still have a third catcher who can, if something happens to Contreras or whatever? I just think that part of the equation gives them more flexibility on in-game moves, because he can legitimately do it. He caught a lot in AAA, and he was pretty good back there. It's not something where I expect him to be like a long-term starting catcher or anything, but he can do it. It's not like an emergency Hernan Perez catcher situation. Like, this is a real catcher who also plays infield spots at a decent level defensively. So a lot of versatility, a lot of good things to like in the bat, and a good athlete as well. So honestly, the Collins type of player is kind of what you can see from him if things go well, I think, is somebody who can do a lot of things, maybe not quite the defender, but maybe brings a little bit more on the base running and the positional versatility, and just somebody who, like you talked about earlier, can be a solid major leaguer. Maybe not a stud, maybe not anything, probably not ever even somebody you want to be like an everyday starter, but somebody who can really help a team over the course of a season with everything he brings to the table. So I've obviously been a big Seigler fan. I've talked about him a lot in the sandbox this year, and very excited to see him up. And you mentioned that you probably put him ahead of Durbin. Interestingly enough, he made 2 starts in his first day against righties. So I don't think that's necessarily coincidence. I think there's a pretty decent chance he'll be getting a good chunk of starts against righty starters. And then Durbin, who's been very good against lefties, it makes plenty of sense for him to get the starts against lefties. Seigler struggles against them. Like, I could see a borderline platoon coming for these two over the long haul, but I'm sure early on they're going to still mix Durbin in against righties, and they want to see what Seigler can do. But if he shows he can hit him, I think we're looking at a potential platoon at some point here.
Yeah, that was the one thing that maybe made the timing of this a little interesting for me, because Durbin has heated up. But
yeah,
the sense that I have gotten is that the front office likes Seigler quite a bit. So even if it's not starting every day against lefties, like I think they believe that this is a guy who can really help them in a couple of different ways, whether that is stealing some of those left-handed starts from Durbin, or right-handed starts from Durbin, bouncing around between a couple of different spots. He kept playing some second base as well in Nashville. So if you need him there for any reason, probably not super likely with Bryce Terang having a productive season. But you talked about like the versatility as a third catcher as well, maybe opening up some different ways that they can use other pieces of this roster. This is a guy who, he's big league ready. He's got the former first round pedigree, not the highest ceiling, but I think a lot more consistent than some of these other guys with how he maximizes what he can do. Like you look at Durbin, for example, maximized what he can do quite well in the minor leagues, but his way of doing it was not, he did not hit the ball hard in AAA. One of the worst hard hit rates in AAA last year, but would pull a lot of those 96-mile-an-hour line drives and fly balls down the line for extra bases. Seigler is just the maximum amount of power he's capable of. Like you said, it's not great, but it's just it's a lot more flush contact, like barreling the baseball up as best he can and doing it a lot more consistently. And I think that's kind of where the difference lies with a couple of with those two guys in particular on offense. So yeah, I'm excited to see what he can do. Obviously, you've seen a lot more of him than I have. So if there's anybody's opinion to default to, I would say yours. But still, we'll see what kind of role he fills. But I would guess at the very least, there's going to be some starts at the hot corner for him. Looking at some injury updates now to just continue kind of walking through here. I mentioned Rob Z. He's expected to start throwing next week, so hopefully not a long-term absence for him. He was put on the IL as part of that series of moves. Talking about some more long-term absences, though, Garrett Mitchell did undergo that season-ending surgery on his shoulder. Done for the year. Brewers have said they're hoping to have him back for spring training 2026. Just continuing the laundry list of not only injuries, but major injuries that Garrett Mitchell has suffered in his time in the big leagues. Blake Perkins, meanwhile, was supposed to be nearing the end of his rehab assignment in AAA. Instead, he was pulled off that rehab assignment with a groin injury. I've seen some people on social media seeing this news and like trying to put their detective caps on and wonder what's going on here. They could have optioned him to Nashville.
Right.
If he didn't get hurt. So
they didn't need to do that.
I mean, I guess the only difference, if you really want to go that far, is like what the pay would be for him. Is he making big league pay on the IL versus minor league pay in Nashville? But even so, they had the ability to keep him down there if they really want to. So I don't think this is a fake injury situation. Nestor Cortez threw 3 innings in his first rehab start on Wednesday. Brewers are still looking at a return sometime after the All-Star break for him. Couple of pieces of news on some more lefties. Connor Thomas, his elbow surgery to remove loose bodies could also end up including UCL repair. They're just going to have to get in there and take a look at it and kind of see what the extent of the damage is. Either way, we're not going to see him again this year. And then finally, Robert Gasser is scheduled to begin a rehab assignment in the Complex League next week, which would position him for a return sometime in August. So maybe even a little sooner than we might have expected based on that usual timeline for Tommy John. But another guy as well who, if the Brewers need to extend that, they can option him as well just to keep building him back up. And it's also going to be a matter of just, is there a need for him? Are there innings for him in that rotation as well? So we'll see how things go for him. Moving on to some listener questions for the week. We'll start with Mason, who asked, how is there such a difference in Joey Ortiz's fielding run value and defensive run save? So if you're looking at Joey Ortiz's defense on Fangraphs, StatCast says that he's been a very, very good defensive shortstop, and defensive run save says that he's been a bad shortstop. We've kind of had this discussion a little bit before, but without going too deep into it, it just comes down to the different ways that these two metrics track defense. Outs above average is meant to consider a number of factors ranging from starting position to where the ball was hit to the speed of the runner, all of these different things. And it's meant to try to basically assign like the expected probability of an out being recorded. And then it stacks up those expected probabilities based on the actual plays that defender made. So if you make more outs than expected, you get positive credit for that. If you make fewer outs than expected, you get negative credit for that. DRS is a little bit more, there's more discretion involved with DRS because they do have like actual video scouts at Baseball Info Solutions who go through some of this stuff. They go through these plays. They have the full extent of it isn't public, but what we do know is that there's like lists of what they consider good fielding plays and bad fielding plays, and you kind of get credited based on those as well. It's not just it's a little more nuanced, I think, than the way that StatCast does it. So more often than not, I'm inclined to prefer DRS over fielding run value or outs above average, which is part of fielding run value. And we've talked a little about Joey's defense before. Like, I would honestly trust DRS a little more. I think that actually lines up a little more closely with what we've seen from him. We've still seen the good plays, but I think there's been some plays that he probably should be making that he's not. Kurt Hogue did a good story on this a couple weeks ago, and he talked to Matt Erickson about this. And without spoiling Kurt's whole story, because you should go read it if you haven't, he's not making some plays that they think he can make. They're not necessarily like routine plays. They're kind of like 50-50 plays. But there's some things going on with like the way he's prepping himself. And I think you've mentioned it before, like how he's timing his jumps as he's getting ready for that ball off the bat. Like, he's not getting to some plays that he probably should be. And I would imagine that's part of the equation for DRS. They're probably looking at some of these plays and saying that he should be getting there, but he's not. And there's probably been a couple of plays too that they're looking at that where he's making misplays as well, not just balls that he probably should be getting to, but isn't. There's probably some of that going on too. So it's kind of a difference in how do you evaluate what's a ball that he should be getting to. I would guess that's where kind of the difference is coming. There's probably some balls that StatCast is saying, these are really tough plays that he's making. Maybe DRS is looking at some of these and they're saying these aren't actually that tough of plays that he's not making.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised DRS is as low on him right now. It does feel like it's been better of late for a few weeks at least. I'm trying to think back to when it started, but I feel like honestly, mostly since that Kurt article came out, I have felt pretty good about what he's doing over there defensively, and I wasn't up until that point. So he's made some nice plays. I know that play he made, that would have been the Rockies game where he slid to his right. Now, I thought that play in particular was a good example of something we're talking about. I thought he made that look a little harder than he needed to in that moment. And then he threw it. I think it was a play Reese, in my opinion, should have been able to pick. But it bounced away and then ended up with McMahon on second, ended up scoring a run, ended up being a very big run in that game. So I'm sure he gets dinged a little bit more by DRS on that one because those types of things do matter for them. But to me, that's one of those, it's like, yeah, but I think, I don't know. It's tough. I think to me, he's been better lately. So I was kind of expecting to go look at it and see that DRS was maybe moving closer to zero. Because he had been negative for a while, and it seems like it's trending a little bit the opposite of from the last time I looked. So that surprised me a little bit, but it is a matter of just how they measure it. Like Jack said, I won't revisit all of that, but I guess to me, I was kind of expecting it to have been trending a little better on the DRS side than it is right now.
I think he's kind of just sitting right on the fence of like how are certain plays defined by all these different systems. If to sum it up a little more succinctly, I would guess that that's kind of what's going on here.
Yeah.
Our next question comes from Jackson, who asked, how likely is it that Freddie Peralta gets traded in the offseason? I guess for the sake of the question, let's just say like on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most likely, we can each throw our numbers out there. I would say 7.
10 being the most likely, you said?
10 being the most likely, I'm saying 7.
Okay. I would say 5. But just to add a little context, that's actually up quite a bit from where it would have been coming into the season for me. I did not expect them to trade him in the offseason. Like at any point, I kind of viewed it as a Willy Adames situation heading into this year. With the addition of a guy like Priester, who looks more like a long-term rotation candidate. We've seen Miz, who went from a decent decently good chance of him ending up in the bullpen to being much more of a starting pitcher long term. Henderson looked good in his debut. You still have a couple of guys with actual big league. At the time coming into the year, it looked like you just didn't have many people who would actually be under contract for 2026 in the rotation who were actual starting candidates. And now I'm not really at that point. I think there are enough options where they're probably going to feel a little more comfortable doing it. But I still think a guy like Freddie at 8 million next year, they might just think the best value is for him to be in their rotation. So I'm not quite to the point where I'm expecting it, but I'm up quite a bit from where I was coming into the year.
For me, the reason I'm saying 7 and not like 9 or 10 is actually the clubhouse aspect of it,
Well, that's
which is
part of
where
it,
there's
yeah.
some similarities to Willie. Like with Adames gone now, that Peralta is kind of like that last clubhouse leader on that end of the clubhouse. So that's the one area where I'm wondering, do you decide that maybe it actually does make more sense to keep him? Because I do think that for as valuable as he's been with the availability, they are going to have a lot of options next year. I think they can find a way to make it work on the field. I think more of the hiccup might be, is this going to do too much damage to repair in the clubhouse if we're letting him go before we need to?
Yeah.
But generally speaking, like especially for pitchers, I'm a pretty big proponent of you get something back for them. You're not going to
Right.
be able to re-sign them. So I wouldn't be shocked if the Brewers are thinking similarly, but we'll see how it all unfolds. I think on paper, it looks like the right move if you don't plan to re-sign him. But the only thing that gives me pause is like the intangible side of it, and that is a tough line to walk.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was why I comped him to Willie, is that I thought they were probably going to be in that boat where they just value him too much in the wide range of things, not just the baseball side of things. And like I said, at that time, it also combined with the fact that you were kind of looking at him and Tobias Myers as like the only starters who were under contract and actually making the rotation. And even with Miz and Henderson at the time, you really didn't know what you were going to get from either of them. Both had reliever risk and still have some to an extent, but much less, I think, now that we've seen it in the big leagues. So now I feel more comfortable with it. But yeah, I still couldn't. I still don't think I can go past like 5, maybe 6. So that's where I'll settle still.
Frederick asked us about the Brewers' offense as a whole. He said, I'm still new to StatCast analysis, so maybe you can help me. Brewers have been a much more efficient offense lately, but they are still at the bottom for barrel percentage. Is it just a matter of connecting when it matters? I thought barrel percentage was important when it came to a good offense. So, yes, hitting the ball hard is very important. It's also not the only way to score, and I think that's kind of the line that we've seen the Brewers operating on for the last couple of seasons. They still get on base at a decent clip, not as good as it was last year, but that is a little bit more of how they try to make it work than just driving the baseball. Now, I still have some concerns about that. I think last year they had a pretty good balance, and this year I think they're still tipped too far toward like the scrappy small ball side of things. However, with the recent hot stretch, they are up to a league average offense now by weighted runs created plus. They're at 100, and 100 is league average. But it is kind of an interesting way they're going about it right now. So to look at some other metrics, like their barrel rate is the worst in baseball. Their hard hit rate, I believe, is like the third worst. Their isolated power, which is slugging percentage minus batting average, is 26th. And if you look at like all of the other teams surrounding them in that area, they're the only team in baseball that hits for this little power that is somehow an average offense. Like every other team in this radius is either slightly below average or very well below average. So they have a 136 isolated power. You look at a lot of other teams in this range. You're looking at like 96 WRC plus, 96, 87, 87, 96, 79, 81, 82. So I'm not sure that it's going to stay the way it's been so far. If they continue hitting the way they have on the season, I think that there's still some guys who are capable of little bit more power and they can start kind of carrying them and improving that number. I think it's also weighed down a little bit by just how little loud contact they made early in the season. That's probably part of it as well. I do think it's something to watch, though. This is a team where like barrel rate is never going to be the ultimate indicator of how well they're doing because that's not necessarily what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
But at the same time, for me, like you got to hit the ball hard, like a certain amount to be consistently productive. And I still don't think they're there. So I would not be shocked if we see some more ebbs with this offense moving forward.
Yep, I agree. I think part of the way the roster is built is that they believe they can score runs without the power because of the speed element and with guys who can hit line drives and maybe turn singles into doubles. But when you talk about ISO, I mean, that factors in doubles and triples, which is supposed to be part of the charm with the Brewers offense. So yeah, I agree. I don't think they're actually a league average caliber offense right now. But I also am in the same boat, and I've said it a number of times. I mean, we've seen it with Yelich, so he's kind of off the table for a guy that I keep saying is going to get going. He's gotten going. I think there's still room. We are seeing Contreras hit the ball hard again recently, which is nice to see. I should note. I think we still need to see it in the air, but that's always been an issue for Contreras. We saw some of his harder hit balls on the season over the last week or so. Hopefully that continues and we start to see a little bit of a jump for him, but that finger issue is always going to be the question. Can he really even impact the ball at a level that we're hoping? Reese has been in a big downturn. So yeah, I think there are guys who can impact the ball that probably will a little bit more as the season goes on, and maybe that evens things out and they stay around league average. But if they keep doing things exactly how they are, I don't think we're going to see it continue at this level.
Ryan asked us a question about this. Actually came in late last week, I believe, but I wanted to get it in here this week because we didn't have time last week. The caveat that Brandon Woodruff is likely to replace Patrick shortly. What are the main drivers as to why the Brewers prefer to keep Patrick up over Logan Henderson? Henderson was very impressive in his 3 starts this year. Would this team, which is always straddling the balance of winning games while developing players, be better off giving Jose Quintana starts to Logan Henderson? I'll tackle the first part of this question to begin. The one thing that is kind of funny to me is, and I've seen quite a few people on social media saying, oh, instead of keeping Patrick up, they should have kept Logan Henderson up because we're seeing the issues with Patrick now. Okay, but let's take a step back here. The issues with Chad Patrick right now are, I think, number one, I don't think his execution is amazing, but also just the fact that he struggles with finding another pitch that isn't a fastball. And that raises some issues for how deep he's able to work into games, familiarity, stuff like that. Guys, Logan Henderson is a 2-pitch pitcher.
Yeah.
Now, what I will say is I think that his 2 pitches play better than Patrick's 3 pitches, the cutter, the 2-seamer, and the 4-seamer. I think that Henderson's stuff is just more funky and the angles are more funky. So if just from a baseline level, I think his 2 pitches are more likely or more often harder to hit and harder to make contact with than Patrick's main 3 pitches. But we are still talking about some pretty similar issues here that doesn't lacking the 3rd and 4th pitch. Can he work deep into games? Things like that. I think there's a lot of people who are just, because they're so infatuated with those first couple of starts. But remember, Chad Patrick was really good in quite a few of his early starts. Now, Henderson's process-based stuff, I think, was still quite a bit better than Patrick was early on, too. But we are still talking, a lot of people are talking about a flawed profile versus a similarly flawed profile. Again, I would probably still take Henderson over Patrick, but when you're talking about this stuff, you're talking about how good the results were for Patrick for, leading up until pretty recently. I just don't think there was a compelling enough reason to give Patrick the boot to keep Henderson around.
Yeah, I agree. I think the other part of the equation beyond everything you laid out there is Henderson is also going to be on a bit of an innings limit. Patrick is not. So for a guy like Henderson, he can go to AAA and make starts that only go 3 innings, and that's not a big deal because it doesn't affect the bullpen. It doesn't affect everything else. Not that Patrick's going super deep into games at the big league level, but the plan isn't to pull him after some short starts like it has been for Henderson in AAA. He's had a couple short ones where they've done it on purpose. It's a matter of managing innings, and you can argue the saving bullets at the big league or for the big league level type of thing, and then maybe at the end of the season you don't have Henderson. My guess is their hope is that they can try to manage Henderson enough that if he's needed at the end of the year at the big league level, he is available, whether that's in a starter or even in a reliever role at the end of the season, if it makes sense. Like, I think that's part of the plan here or part of the thought process. And like Jack said, I'm a big Henderson guy. I have been for a long time, but it's a similar issue. Like, there are concerns about whether once teams see him a second time, are they going to be much more comfortable against him? Once the order sees him a third time, is that going to be a problem for him too? Like, I like Henderson. I think there's a much higher ceiling for him than Patrick, but over the course of the 2 months, I wouldn't have been surprised. And I think there's a decent chance Patrick did outperform what Henderson would have done if he had been up the whole time. That wouldn't surprise me by any means. So I get it. I think it's much more fun. It would have been more fun to watch Logan Henderson in some of these starts, but I think it's a pretty understandable process for the Brewers to have gone this direction. The other part of it, and this is not a huge deal to me, but I don't know how much it matters to the Brewers. Chad Patrick has nothing to prove in AAA. Like, he clearly can get batters out at that level at a very high rate. Like, he dominated AAA last year. He was the Triple Crown winner, and some of those stats we didn't care that much about, but he was a Triple Crown winner in AAA. Like, he has nothing to show there. Henderson still can work on his other pitches there. He only had spent a few weeks in AAA at the end of last year. Like, there's more time for development down there for him. And I think they'd rather kind of give him that development time in a less stressful environment because he still has the time on his side where Patrick doesn't necessarily. So I think from a development standpoint, it actually makes a little more sense for Henderson to get that done at the AAA level, where he has been mixing in more sliders and cutters since he's gone down, not to an insane extent, but he's throwing them more than he did prior to his big league debut. And I think that's on purpose. So I think that plays a role in it too.
Second part of the question, would they be better off giving Quintana starts to Henderson? I'm going to say not right now, but maybe along the lines of what you said, they need him late in the year. Maybe then it would be a better choice because maybe at that point Henderson's just the better pitcher. But I think right now, in the interest of depth and also just from a standpoint of a guy who has a track record versus a guy who doesn't, and you have a lot of season left, it makes more sense to be giving Quintana those starts for now, I think.
Yep, agreed.
This can be a question for you since you're the minor league guy, and it would actually help us transition nicely into the minor league sandbox. Nate asks if we can go over updates on some of the early relievers that are in the minors now. How are they doing? Examples including Craig Yoho, Elvin Rodriguez, Yoel Payamps, Brian Hudson, Elvis Peguero. If you can just make some room for me when you talk about Elvin, unless you hit it yourself, I have a note on him I want to bring up. You might know what it is.
I think I do, and it was something I was going to bring up, I think.
All right, then you can bring it up.
We'll see. So Yoho, I mean, over the course of the whole season, he's gone 26 and 2/3 innings in AAA. He has a 1.01 ERA. The FIP is 2.93, in large part due to an 10.9% walk rate. But he's still striking out 29% of hitters. Like, he's not having issues in AAA. He's been very good at that level. I would like to see the walk rate come down a little bit. I think he's capable of getting it down a little bit. But as we've talked about a number of times, he is going to be a guy who walks hitters, and it's not something that should be shocking when it does happen with the type of stuff and movement he has. It's going to happen at times. On Elvin Rodriguez, since he's gone down, he's gone 28 innings total. He has a 4.5 ERA with a 5.6 FIP. strikeout rate is 20.7%, and his walk rate is 3.4%. So limiting walks at a very high level. Since his last demotion, he came back up for a game or two, if people recall. He went his first 9 outings out of that stretch. He went 14 innings, struck out 14, only walked 1, and only allowed 2 earned runs, though they were both solo homers. So again, the homers have been an issue for Rodriguez. We saw at the big league level. His last 3 outings at the time of this recording have been very bad, though, so that kind of skewed the numbers way back up for the season. 4 2/3, 7 earned, only 4 strikeouts to 3 walks, and only 1 home run for the 7 earned runs. But again, a little bit of a rough stretch there. I think the main thing, and I'm guessing this is what Jack was going to point out, is that the cutter usage is way down in AAA. 4% usage down there. The sweeper has been his second most often used pitched, and then his curve has been his third, which, again, breaking balls is what we wanted to see more. Now, they're still both, on the whole, the sweeper and the curve are being used about 35% of the time. Fastball usage total is about 57%. The fact that he's still doing that in a shorter role maybe is something that I don't love to see. Like, I get that you maybe have to sit in that range when you are in a long relief or starters role, but he's mostly been 1 or 2 inning stints. I think he could probably still go even a little bit more on the breaking stuff. But this is a much better place to be in. And the sweeper has been very good for him. It has a 36.8% whiff rate, and expected weighted on base average on balls in play is only 129. So it's been a very, very good pitch for him. Again, I still think it's something he could use more than he does. But I do like seeing that cutter usage down. And Jack, I'm assuming that's what you wanted to bring up.
Yes, it was. It's a bad pitch, and it looks like he's finally, for the most part, stopped throwing a bad pitch.
Yeah. I should even check too. I wonder if some of that use, I think he used it a lot when he first got sent down before the time he came back up. So I wonder if these are total numbers. I wonder if he's even been using it hardly at all since he came back down the second time. So I'll check into that at some point. But yeah, that is very nice to see for him. And he had a really nice stretch. I think we've seen that it can work when things are going right. It's just a matter of if he can do it consistently. And I think the pitch usage is now in a better place. So now it's more up to him and being able to execute if they keep doing things this way. Yoel Payamps has been very good since he went down to AAA. 8 1/3 innings, 4 hits. He's only allowed 1 earned run. He struck out 10 to only 2 walks. So that's a 1.08 ERA and a 1.85 FIP. The stuff, very similar to what we saw in the big leagues. There hasn't really been a change there. But it plays very, very well at the AAA level. And he, if anything, at worst, he's a quad A pitcher at this point because he just dominates AAA in this moment. Like, guys aren't hitting him. The whiff rate on the slider is almost 50%. And on the 4-seam too, which we've seen in the past play really well at the top of the zone, it's 27%, which is a really strong number for a 4-seam fastball. It's going to be harder for him because he's not on the 40-man now. But if he keeps this up, I think there's a pretty decent chance he does end up back in Milwaukee at some point and getting another opportunity. And maybe the fact they gave him so much rope and he couldn't really rein it in actually ended up working out for the Brewers, where teams just weren't comfortable claiming him because it took so long. And he was able to stay in the organization because, yeah, I mean, we've talked about it before. There's still something there for him. The stuff, like you had talked about a lot, Jack, hadn't really regressed at all. So it's playing very well in AAA. We'll see if he's able to find another spot on the major league roster at any point, but it's been good to see it working out down there. Anything you want to add on Payamps, Jack?
No, I think you covered it.
Okay. Brian Hudson, this one sucks. Not fun to watch or read or look at. Since he was last demoted, people will remember he struggled mightily in Cleveland, and then was kind of hung out to dry. So everyone knew he was being demoted again. Since he was demoted at that time, he's gone 12 2/3 innings. He has a 5.68 ERA, and he has 9 walks and only 8 strikeouts in that time. It's the velo's still not. The velo actually is like probably up a little bit from where we saw it at the end of last year. but it's still not in a spot where it's getting where you want it to be. The sweeper velo's down. Nothing's playing very well. He's getting hit hard. Well, he's not getting hit super hard. I shouldn't say that, but he's not getting swing and miss still, which is what we talked about a lot with him. Interestingly, though, Jack, the one pitch that actually has looked pretty good for him in AAA, it's been low usage. The sinker has been quite good for him. He's actually getting whiffs with it. Now, again, 20 pitches he's thrown here, but he's gotten some whiff. And when it's been in play, it's basically just been a weak ground ball every time. So maybe that's his path. Maybe he starts upping that usage and you start seeing that be more his primary fastball, kind of what we've talked about with Hall. Maybe he becomes that kitchen sink fastball type of guy, and maybe that helps the four seam play up a little bit more if he's showing the sinker more. And to me, that's kind of the path for him. I don't know what else he's going to do because that velo just does not seem to be coming back.
I mean, I think the biggest path for him is he's just got to throw strikes.
Well, that
that's
too.
still isn't
Yeah.
happening. It just now I haven't watched him like you have since he was sent back down, but it really just seems like this is a guy who they cannot figure out any semblance of consistency with the mechanics from one day to the next, or even from one pitch to the next. And I don't know if that's a little bit due to he's built kind of weird. It's an odd frame for a reliever, and he moves in an odd way for a guy with that frame as well. And a lot of that is what makes him effective when it's working. But I do wonder if it's a little bit of a double-edged sword in that it's just so unrepeatable.
Yeah, it is. That long of limbs. He's cross body. He's got, there's just a lot going on there. And like you said, I think pretty decent chance at this point. We're just talking about a guy who had them completely locked in for a couple of months last year. And we saw that it can work extremely well when that is happening. But is he ever able to find that for the long term? Right now, we're talking about basically a calendar year of no, he hasn't. So it's getting to the point where I don't think I'd be shocked if they need a 40-man spot at some point somewhat soon, and he's one of the players on the chopping block, especially if it's to add a pitcher where they're trying to kind of even things out. He's got to be getting pretty close to the top of that list with how things are trending. So that's unfortunate because genuinely the first couple of months last year were some of the best relief pitching we had seen from a Brewers reliever. He was pretty dominant to start last year. The last name we'll talk about here is Elvis Peguero. Again, this is 2 years ago. We saw a very good version of Peguero, probably some luck involved, but he was quite good in his first season with the Brewers. In the minors this year, 18 2/3. It's a 3.86 ERA, but a 5.4 FIP, 20 strikeouts to 12 walks. Again, with Hudson, he's getting more swing and miss. He's getting more strikeouts on the board, but 12 walks in 18 2/3. Command's always been an issue for him, but that's clearly continuing. And the contact's been louder than you would think. I don't have the numbers up for his stuff, but the velo when I've been watching is down from where we saw it a couple years ago, similar to what we saw last year, more with the fastball velo. But yeah, he's actually probably another one that's probably getting a little closer to, okay, how long do they even keep him around? Because they're calling up Easton McGee over him every time they have the chance. They're calling up Yoho for the doubleheader. At what point is he even serviceable depth that you care about keeping? I think that's the question for both of those two. And I think that's getting closer to the end for both of them, which is unfortunate because, again, both of them gave some very nice stretches, but it's also kind of, that's the way relief pitching goes. We talk about it a lot. It's a very volatile position and just part of the team. And it's not shocking to see this happen, but it is unfortunate because both of them had the ability at their peak to be pretty good out of the bullpen. But anything else you want to add on any of those guys, Jack?
I don't think so. Just like what you said, the shelf life for relievers is usually very, very, very short.
Yeah. And that's why you see them traded so often at the deadline, even from I mean, obviously the Brewers acquire them a lot, but you see a move constantly at the deadline, and it's because teams feel that they can replace them, and or they believe the player is just going to start to fall off a little bit. And then in some cases, like the Brewers with Nick Mears, they believe there's an untapped market there for him, that he's going to be better than what he was putting up. But it's just very volatile. There's a lot of movement, and there are every year you're going to see a lot of movement in a major league bullpen for a bunch of different reasons. So yeah, it was interesting to look at kind of all the numbers together though, and see some of them. I hadn't really done that. You notice them over time, but that was a fun little exercise to do.
You brought up Mears as an example of this. Like, that's probably, I would not be shocked if he could end up being like the next guy in this list. Like, he's really good
Yep.
for 1 or 2 years. But guess what? Like, his velo's already down a touch this year. Like, I don't like to say this, but I would not be shocked if he continues to have a really, really, really good year this year, and then doesn't even finish next year on the roster. Like, this is just what happens.
Yeah. I mean, Piamps is similar. He had a couple good years, but yeah, it's just the nature of the beast with relief pitchers for sure.
Please continue with your sandbox.
Okay, I will jump into it. We got a couple questions, draft related on both of them. So Mason asked about Jace Laviolette. He is mocked to the Brewers on the latest Pipeline mock draft. He says, to me, the Brewers absolutely should bet on that type of power potential. My questions are, 1, what do you think of the player? 2, is it reasonable to believe the Brewers would pick him? 3, how expensive is he going to be? So good questions there. Personally, wouldn't be the biggest fan of the pick, though I would understand it. The power ceiling is definitely there. I mean, there's really big power in there. In terms of value, he came into this season looking like, for most people, the expected number 1 pick, if not probably a top 5 pick at worst. It didn't happen this year in terms of, I think, some of the development that people were not only expecting, but almost just believed it was going to happen and didn't really factor in that it might not. He's had whiff issues in college. It hasn't really improved. In fact, it was at some point, at times this year, is an even bigger issue than it had been in the past. Again, if they picked him, it's not going to be something where I freak out and think it's an awful pick. I do think there is a big ceiling here. My issue is that I'm not sure, again, kind of like when they picked Wilkin, I'm just not sure it's a profile that the Brewers are very good at developing. I think they're better at adding power to profiles that have really good bat to ball abilities and do things like that well already. I don't know that they're good at improving the hit tool for people who don't have that in their kit already. So like that makes him a tough pick for me. In terms of money, my guess is he would not be under slot if he's picked at 20. And that, like, on its own might make it a little less likely for it to happen, as they definitely like to go under slot. The Brewers like to go under slot in the first round. It's not something they have to do or something that's hard and fast. They do it every single time, but like they do seem to kind of lean that direction where they can save a little money and then take some bigger risks a little bit later. So I guess to summarize, I wouldn't hate the pick, but it definitely would not be one that if I were in that position, I would make. And money-wise, I think Laviolette would end up getting more than what the Brewers would normally prefer to give a college first-round pick. So we'll see. I mean, there is an argument. It's kind of Garrett Mitchell-like, where somebody who had all the potential and didn't necessarily show it his final season at every step, maybe they take him and view it as a big just a big value added type of pick, but I'd be a little surprised by the pick, I think, and I wouldn't be a huge fan of it. On that note of boom or bust type of players, HC Purdy asked, the Brewers seem to be willing to take risks in the draft, and it seems Jack Bauer is almost the epitome of boom or bust. What do you think? Also, fun fact, he adds, he wears number 24, and then he says, I'm older than you both, but do you remember the show 24? So I do not remember the show 24, but I have seen references to that show in Jack Bauer's scouting reports, as I have read them throughout the draft cycle. So I got the gist of it. I looked into it a little bit and understood. I should say I've heard of the show too, but I've never actually watched it. But anyway, moving on to the Jack Bauer, that is a pitcher in this draft class. It would be a very fun one in terms of the ceiling there. And like you said, I think they're more boom or bust when they take high school players. I think they are more interested in that, though I think they would probably lean more towards position players with their first pick if they're going boom or bust with a high school guy. The fastball's been up to 102. So like he's a lefty in high school who's touched 102. And even for one appearance that a lot of people were watching sat in that 100-mile-per-hour range. The command is not good. But again, it's a lefty throwing triple digits. It comes from a pretty low slot. But the shape of the pitch is not very good. And he really only has one other pitch, and that's the slider. Slider's not a bad pitch either. Gets up close to 3,000 RPMs. Like it is a very moldable. It's a moldable pitching frame. At the same time, even in high school, he's only working 2-3 inning outings. For me, I would feel a lot more comfortable taking Jack Bauer after he went to college and seeing if he could actually hold velo as a starter. Like even in the third inning of some of his outings, he was down to like 91, 92. So whether he can actually start would play a big role in wanting to use a first pick on a high school pitcher. And I question whether the Brewers would be willing to take that big of a swing. I question if anyone will be, to be honest. I think he ends up at Mississippi State. I just think teams aren't going to be willing to take that risk. So if he goes to Mississippi State and pitches well, he's a guy who will absolutely have a chance to be like a top 5 pick at the end of his college career. But I think there's a lot that teams might want to see him do first against better competition. So I'd be a little surprised by that one as well. Moving into the hitter portion of the sandbox, we'll start with a DSL player, Moises Polanco, who had a 1058 OPS this week. He had 1 double. He's repeating the DSL despite having a 129 WRC plus last season. It's at 125 this year, so he's off to another good start. In both of the seasons, he has yet to hit a home run. So it seems to be a bit more of a slash type of hitter when you look at that. But in a weird kind of twist, when you look at his batted ball profile, he's actually got a high fly ball percentage and a pretty low ground ball rate. So I haven't found video of him. I haven't found much on him, but it's just lack of homer with a high fly ball rate, lack of extra base hit in general, but also still good performances. It's hard for me to wrap my head around. Part of it is because he has a 21.4% walk rate this year to only a 16.7 strikeout rate. So he's got a 440 on base percentage, but interesting profile, young guy still, and had a really good week. So brought him up there. I talked about Pedro Ibargüen last week because he had been promoted to Carolina, had yet to debut. He really figured things out in the ACL this year after a really rough first season there. His first 4 games, 926 OPS with the Mudcats. He had 6 hits, including a walk-off hit. His build, he looks the part as a 19-year-old. He looks like someone who belongs there. I like his swing. It'll be interesting to follow him. I didn't have super high hopes, but after seeing him in that first week, he just looked strangely, kind of surprisingly comfortable. And he's got some positional versatility. Again, he had a really good DSL year, and then he had a really good start to the season in the ACL this year after a rough one last year. We'll see. He's one I'll be keeping an eye on for sure. Eric Batanti has been a regular on the list recently. He had a 1087 OPS this week with 2 homers and 2 doubles. He's up to a 128 WRC plus in the season now. Won't repeat it ever, or I will repeat it, but I'm not going to go super deep into it like I have in the past. He has to bring the swing and miss down and the strikeouts down if it's ever going to work, but he's still very young and he still has plenty of time to do that. Just need to start seeing some progress somewhat soon, I would say. Tyler Rodriguez, another Mudcat player. He had a 903 OPS this week, and he hit his first full season home run. He's up to a 105 WRC plus in low A as a 19-year-old. Walk rate and strikeout rate are both hovering at 17%. There hasn't been much slug yet. I mentioned the first homer, but there have not been many extra base hits. He's got a 22.8% line drive rate, which is solid. I think if he can add strength to his frame, then I like the swing. I mentioned that when he first got called up to low A. Like, I like the video that I've seen of the swing. I think the bat can be interesting, but he's going to have to add some strength and start to impact the ball a little bit more. He had only played 10 games in the outfield before this year, but it has been exclusively outfield for him with the Mudcats, even playing some center field recently. So he looks pretty decent out there. We'll have to see. He had a pretty big error the other day in left on a ground ball, but on fly balls and everything, he seems to track the ball pretty well, and he's looked pretty good out there for not having much experience. At the high A level, we have Blake Burke continuing to hit. He had a 1051 OPS this past week with a homer and a double. He's up to a 131 WRC plus in high A. The power showing up a little bit more lately, which is nice to see. It's shockingly the one thing that's been lacking in the offensive profile. He has huge raw power, but there is a bit more ground ball in the profile than you would want to see for a guy his size and with the raw power that he has. He's had a ball at 117 miles per hour off the bat this year. He hit a 113 mile per hour homer in the past week. The power's there. He almost cleared the batter's eye on a homer recently as well in Appleton, which is that's a long ways away. The power is there. I need to see it more in games soon, but he also is batting over 300 and showing really good bat to ball skills for a guy his size and with the profile that you wouldn't expect it to be there. So that's been encouraging. If the power starts to show up, I think there's a lot there with the bat. A guy who probably should be challenged with Double A soon, but is in a weird spot in part because of Mike Bovee, who had a 919 OPS this week with a homer. He's up to a 114 WRC plus overall in Double A. He has 4 homers. He's only playing first base so far defensively, and he's actually only played 10 games there. He spent most of the beginning of his season injured with a shoulder injury that required surgery. He wasn't able to play the field at first, but he could DH for about 30 games. He's been mixing in at first base more of late. The strikeout rate has been steadily declining after a slow start. In that regard, always been a guy who did not strike out much, but he was striking out a lot to start the season. Coming off that surgery, now he's brought that way back down. So that's the last hitter we have. Moving to 4 pitchers we're going to talk about this week, starting with one DSL pitcher. I believe it's Josue Toledo. He went 4 hitless and scoreless innings in DSL this week, 1 appearance. He struck out 6 in those 4 innings, but he did also walk 5. I found some video of him. He's from what I've seen, 4-seam, sinker, slider combo. He's in the low 90s on the fastballs. I saw a 93 on the 4-seam. The slider is in the low 80s, but it looks like a really good pitch. I think the slider is probably the pitch getting the swing and miss for him the most. The sinker's got a lot of movement to it as well. I don't know. Hard to say on the 4-seam from the video we have, but all of the video I saw of it was getting swings at the top of the zone. So maybe a little more velo than most DSL pitchers and some interesting shapes. I would definitely like to see a changeup or something along those lines added. But really right now, the walks are the big issue for him. I would say they're probably too high to even think much of him at the moment, but the video I saw, the stuff, the strikeouts, it's interesting. He's a name I'll at least keep an eye on. It's not somebody I expect to be much of a prospect, but you never know. He caught my eye a little bit on that video. Couple other, 3 other pitchers to talk about here from full season ball now. Brett Witrowski, in his last start, went 6 innings, no earned runs, 2 hits, 1 walk, 6 strikeouts. He has been very, very good of late. He had a little bit of a rough start his first 3 outings of the season. Another guy who got hurt in spring, took a little bit longer to build up. He's still been building up over these starts. This is the first time he went past 5 innings, and he went 6 shutouts, so that was nice to see. But his last 7 starts, he's gone 30 in the 3rd innings. Strikeout rate is 22.3%, which is lower than I would expect for a guy with his stuff. The walk rate, though, has been 6.9% after He walked 9 in a span of 2 starts early in the season, so he's really been much better at being in the zone since then. And then he has a 2.08 ERA with a 2.3 FIP. So the one thing with Wojciechowski when I watch him is that I worry that he doesn't necessarily know what his fastball is doing from pitch to pitch. I always watch the signs that catchers put down when pitchers in the lower levels are pitching so that I can tell what he's actually trying to throw. And usually when I see a 1 go down, sometimes it'll run, sometimes it will cut, sometimes it will ride. And there are different signs for the actual cutter that he throws and the actual two-seam that he throws. So I don't know that he has like a good fastball shape consistently right now, but he's been sitting much higher on the velo than he did in his AA stint last year. I've seen him sitting in that 94 to 96 range. I've seen some 98s from him as a starter. It's holding pretty well in starts, including in, some of the deeper ones he's been making recently. I still like Wojciechowski a lot. I think he's just got to find a good release point on the fastball and maybe even be able to more consistently break them into 3 different pitches. But the sweeper is a nasty pitch. The slider is a good pitch on its own. Changeup's made some strides this year, I would say. So there's a lot to like here. I worry a little bit about the fastball profile. And for the Brewers, they obviously care quite a bit about the fastball profile. So we will have to see where that takes him. Tate Keener went 5 1/3 shutout. He gave up 5 hits, walked 2, and struck out 9 in this one. He is up to 71 2/3 innings on the season with a 2.64 ERA, striking out 26.6% of hitters. He does have a walk rate of 13.8%, though, so far too many walks for him to this point. He gets a ton of swing and miss. He also gets a decent amount of grounders with the way his fastball plays, which is a very low slot, but also like a almost sidearm release. And he's been up to 96 this year, sitting in like that 93, 94 range. Pretty good secondary. Like if he's in the zone more, I think this is a name people need to pay probably a little more attention to. His last 9 starts, that walk rate has only been 10.6%, which is a better place to be. And the strikeout rate is 30.2% in that time. So Keener in those 45 innings has a 1.6 ERA and a 2.76 FIP. It has improved. The command has improved as the season goes along. So we'll have to see if that continues to trend that way. But a lefty with a sidearm delivery with good stuff that he holds into start, like deep into starts, it's very interesting. I mean, at the very least, I can absolutely see a role in the pen for him at some point. If the command improves enough, I think there's a potential major league starter here, which is this is a 2023 draft pick, unsurprisingly, just like everybody else that signed for under slot out of Louisville. He was a spot starter, mostly reliever in college, who gained a little velo his senior year and has gained even a tick or 2 more in pro ball. Like I'm a big Tate Keener fan. I want to see those walks come down just a little bit more as the season progresses. And then finishing with a name who has been a common one on this list all year, Ethan Ortiz. He had another really strong low A appearance now. Again, 18 all season here. He went 4 hitless, 4 scoreless innings. He did walk 3, but he struck out 6. He's good. Like I think Kurt Hogue put him pretty high in his personal rankings that came out on JS Online, which you should go check out. He put out 3 different articles for his top, I believe, like 35, maybe even a few more with some honorable mentions. Dortchy's ranked pretty high, and I get it. Like I don't really expect the walks to be a huge issue for him. When I watch him, he's mostly around the target, around the zone. He does throw a splitter, and I think splitters at times can be one of those pitches that just get away from you once in a while. So there are some bad misses, but I don't expect the walks to be as high as they've been in low A so far. And the stuff is really solid. He just has the appearance of a guy who makes starts in the big leagues for like a decade and maybe doesn't get a ton of recognition or isn't seen as this great starting pitcher, but like a Kyle Gibson type, maybe with, little different stuff, but just the scope of their career where people maybe didn't appreciate how solid he was for the prime of his career. So that's who I see Dortchy's as. Again, he's 18 years old. There's still more room for velo. He's 6'5", still some room to put on some weight. and some mass and a good 5 to 6 pitch mix already that he likes to mix all of them. So very, very interesting arm that they found for basically slot, actually a little under slot as a high school pitcher signed to UIC in Chicago going into last year as a 10th round pick. So a very nice find for the Brewers. And that will wrap up the Sandbox for this week.
Before we close out this week, I have been instructed to give a reminder. Brewer Fanatic is hosting its annual tailgate at the ballpark. That is coming on July 12th. As a reminder, that is a giveaway day, so the first 25,000 fans in attendance will receive a 90s throwback jersey, Brewers jersey from the 90s. The cost for a ticket to attend with Brewer Fanatic is $60. However, that's also the same price for a caretaker membership for the site, $60. And if you have one of those, you get your ticket for free. And you also get access to exclusive content that we might put behind a paywall every once in a while. So a couple of added perks there. You can also browse the site ad-free. But go to brewerfanatic.com. You can buy your tickets for that event if you're interested in going. I believe Spencer McKay will be making an appearance, so that should draw quite the crowd.
Yeah, well, I have that effect. Yeah, but no, I should be there. I'll be there pregame. I actually, funny enough, already had tickets for the game, so I will not be sitting with Brewer Fanatic, but I will be there for the tailgate at some point. So yes, if anyone wants to stop by, I'd be happy to talk some Brewers with anyone who stops by.
My understanding is that a couple of the Milwaukee tailgate guys will be there as well.
Yes.
So if you're a listener of Milwaukee's Tailgate Brewers podcast, you can meet a couple of those guys as well while scarfing down brats, burgers. I don't know what the menu is, but I'm just assuming tailgate, like we've got the essentials covered. So you can buy your tickets at brewerfanatic.com, either $60 for a ticket, or you can just spend the $60 on a caretaker membership and get your ticket free from there. That will do it for us this week. As always, thank you for listening, and we'll be back with more Brewers coverage next Friday.